There's a kind of violence that doesn't shout, doesn't break bones, and never makes headlines. It lives in the pauses between words, in the unblinking stare across a table, in the carefully timed silence that makes another person doubt themselves. It is the quiet hostility that slips beneath the surface of civility, the aggression that hides behind politeness. Every society teaches people to suppress open conflict, but what happens to that repressed energy doesn't vanish, it mutates. It seeps into gestures, into the way someone holds eye contact for half a second too long, or the way their voice lowers just enough to remind you who holds the power. This is not physical domination, it's psychological maneuvering, a war of subtle signals, where the battlefield is presence itself. Machiavelli would call this the purest form of control, influence without exposure. He understood that the most dangerous aggression isn't unleashed through chaos, but through composure. A calm face can conceal 1,000 calculated intentions. The stillness of a body can be the armor of someone trained not to react, but to read, to assess, to manipulate. When you begin to observe people through this lens, you notice that what appears harmless often carries strategic tension. The charming colleague who leans too close, the friend whose compliments always end in a disguised critique, the leader who smiles as he cuts you off. Every move is data, every micro-expression a declaration of hierarchy. Hidden aggression is civilization's favorite disguise. Because we've learned to condemn open conflict, domination learned to evolve. It became elegant, controlled, untraceable. Machiavelli would say it's the art of appearing peaceful while advancing your position, and those who master it don't need weapons. They use gestures, they don't threaten, they imply. They don't raise their voices, they lower them. Power, after all, doesn't need volume, it only needs awareness. Machiavelli never wrote about posture or facial tension, yet every line of The Prince breathes the psychology of body language. He understood that power isn't simply political, it's theatrical. It exists in how a presence fills a room, how authority is communicated before a single word is spoken. For him, control begins long before speech. The true strategist governs not through argument but through aura. Power, in its most refined form, doesn't demand recognition. It assumes it. It's not loud because it doesn't need to be. The lion roars, but the fox survives. And so, in the modern world, hidden aggression has replaced open warfare. It's the Machiavellian evolution of dominance, coded not in decrees, but in gestures. To Machiavelli, the body was the throne from which influence radiated. A steady gaze could establish hierarchy. A relaxed stance could disarm a rival. He would have seen the micro-expressions we overlook, the faint smirk of superiority, the frozen politeness of contempt, the subtle shift of weight that says, I control this space. These are the new political maneuvers, the modern equivalent of royal decrees. They unfold in conversations, meetings, negotiations, in every space where power hides beneath civility. Machiavelli's brilliance was understanding that the world is not ruled by truth, but by perception, and perception, more than anything, is shaped by the body. Hidden aggression is the physical manifestation of strategy, a kind of embodied Machiavellianism. It's not about destruction, but orchestration. It's the quiet choreography of dominance written in glances and pauses. This is what he meant when he advised rulers to appear virtuous. Appear, not be. The body becomes the costume of power, the mask of control, and if you learn to read it, you begin to see that most of what passes for kindness is theater, and that beneath every calm exterior lies a negotiation of authority. Most people imagine aggression as an explosion, a raised voice, a slammed door, a visible conflict. But that's only the primitive version, the one that children and amateurs still use. The real danger lies in the aggression that hides behind warmth, civility, and charm. It doesn't shout. It calibrates. It studies you first. It learns how you respond, what you crave, what you fear, and then it turns those observations into instruments of control. This kind of aggression is not impulsive, it's strategic. It aims not to wound your body, but to penetrate your psyche. And the terrifying truth is that it often wears a smile. Hidden aggression wants to dominate without ever appearing dominant. It's the colleague who flatters you just before undercutting your idea. The friend who offers honest feedback that leaves you doubting yourself for days. The partner whose tone is always calm but whose silence burns like ice. These are not accidents. They are micro-calculations of hierarchy. Each gesture, each pause, each smile conceals an intention to make you smaller without making themselves appear cruel. This is why Machiavelli would say that power doesn't need to attack. It simply needs to control the frame. Whoever defines the emotional atmosphere of an interaction already wins it. The body betrays this game before the words do. Watch the eyes that linger too long, the shoulders that stay too still, the smile that ends a moment too soon. These are not random quirks. They are tells. The nervous system reveals what the intellect tries to hide. A clenched jaw masks suppressed hostility. A tilted head feigns submission while calculating advantage. The body becomes a battlefield disguised as politeness. And once you see it, you realize how most social interactions are not exchanges of meaning, but of dominance. The one who stays calm longest, who controls tone, distance, and timing, that's the victor. Hidden aggression is not a loss of control. It's control perfected. Every social space, from a boardroom to a dinner table, is a quiet battlefield of unspoken hierarchies. Beneath the exchange of ideas and opinions, there's a constant undercurrent of negotiation. Who leads, who follows, who yields, who commands. This negotiation doesn't happen through logic or words, but through the subtleties of movement and tone. The body speaks before the mouth does. A confident lean signals ownership of space. A delayed blink indicates internal resistance. Frozen shoulders reveal a person guarding their vulnerability. These micro-expressions form an invisible hierarchy that governs behavior more effectively than any written rule. Machiavelli would have seen this for what it truly is, the ongoing rehearsal of power. Society functions not through equality, but through a delicate choreography of dominance and submission. In every interaction, someone is setting the emotional tempo. Someone is framing what's acceptable to say, how loud laughter can be, how much silence can stretch before it becomes tension. Most people interpret this as personality. Machiavelli would call it strategy, a language of control encoded in posture and presence. Think about how authority is established in modern life. Leaders don't command through force anymore. They project certainty. A politician lowers his voice when he wants to appear trustworthy. An executive pauses longer than necessary after a question, forcing others to fill the silence. Even in friendships, the one who maintains composure during disagreement silently claims the higher ground. We're conditioned to obey calmness because we mistake it for confidence. In truth, it's dominance disguised as emotional control. Hidden aggression sustains this invisible machinery. It fuels polite societies, structured workplaces, and even spiritual communities. People who sense it but can name it call it energy or vibe. What they're really perceiving is the undercurrent of strategy, the subtle physics of hierarchy. The world, Machiavelli would say, is not ruled by fairness or morality, but by those who master this invisible performance. Once you learn to see it, you can't unsee it. Every interaction becomes a study in microaggression and intent. The room that once felt warm now feels charged, electric, alive with tension that no one else seems to notice. You catch the flicker of a smirk when someone is contradicted. You notice how a colleague's chin lifts a fraction higher when they want to reassert control. You realize that words are only camouflage. The real conversation happens in silence, through the choreography of gazes, gestures, and subtle shifts in posture. Suddenly, every smile becomes suspect. Every compliment carries an echo of strategy. You sit in a meeting, and your body becomes a radar. The man who leans back in his chair isn't relaxed. He's testing dominance through stillness. The woman who interrupts with laughter isn't merely social. She's deflecting tension to disarm a challenge. Even your own movements start to betray you. The instinctive tightening of your throat when interrupted, the micro-shift in your breathing when someone invades your personal space. You begin to understand that every human exchange is an emotional chess match played beneath the threshold of awareness. It's a strange awakening, exhilarating and alienating. You no longer move through conversations. You navigate them like a strategist walking through a minefield. What once seemed friendly now feels performative. You sense that people aren't simply expressing themselves. They're defending invisible territories. The way someone stands too close, the way another avoids eye contact, all are moves on the same board. The more attuned you become, the more exhausting social life feels. You start craving silence, not because you dislike people, but because you can finally hear the noise beneath their words. You see that what most call connection is often a carefully negotiated truce. Civility, you realize, is simply the thin skin stretched over an ancient instinct, the desire to dominate or not be dominated. Awareness feels like power at first, like you've cracked a secret code that everyone else ignores. But then, slowly, it becomes a curse. Because once you learn to read the undercurrents, you can't return to the comfort of surface meanings. The small talk that used to feel harmless now feels rehearsed. Compliments sound like positioning. Even kindness begins to look like an exchange rate. You realize that behind every smile there's a calculation. Behind every tone of empathy, a test of influence. What most people experience as connection, you now experience as strategy. It's not cynicism, it's perception sharpened to the point of pain. You start hearing what others don't, the tremor of insecurity behind a boast, the hunger for validation disguised as humility, the resentment hiding in politeness. Every gesture becomes transparent, every silence a trap. Conversations turn into duels of emotional management. Who controls the tempo? Who yields first? Who flinches when the air thickens? It's not about words anymore. It's about rhythm, posture, and control. And this knowledge isolates you. Because how do you unsee manipulation once you've seen it in motion? How do you relax when every movement around you screams motive? Machiavelli would call this the cost of lucidity, the loneliness of perception. When you see the machinery of power beneath the masks, the world loses its innocence. You stop expecting sincerity, because you've seen how even truth can be weaponized. People become transparent, predictable, mechanical in their attempts to dominate or avoid domination. What once felt like chaos now feels like choreography, a dark ballet of control. Awareness, you discover, isn't liberation, it's exposure. You no longer belong to the game because you understand it too well, and from that point on, peace becomes something rare. Not because the world has changed, but because your eyes have. At a certain point, those who truly see the game no longer wish to play it. They realize that engaging with noise only feeds it, that reacting gives away position. The perceptive begin to choose silence, not as surrender, but as strategy. They no longer argue with the arrogant or seek validation from the unaware. They study instead, quietly, patiently, like a chess player who has already calculated the final move. Their calm is not weakness, it's control. They have understood a principle Machiavelli lived by. The more you reveal, the less power you hold. And so they start to withdraw, not out of fatigue but precision. The retreat is not physical at first, it's psychological. You stop explaining yourself, stop trying to correct misperceptions, stop performing your innocence. You let others fill the silence with their projections while you conserve energy. Distance becomes a form of discipline. You no longer react to provocation because you see what it's trying to achieve, a pull into emotional chaos, a test of dominance. And by refusing to participate, you expose the weakness in others, their need to be seen, to be right, to be affirmed. Your silence becomes their mirror. This kind of withdrawal feels like power in its purest form, the power of restraint. You start to understand that most conflicts are traps designed to drain awareness. By staying silent, you remain outside their gravity. Machiavelli would call this strategic invisibility, to be present yet untouchable, to let others exhaust themselves while you preserve command. In time, silence changes you. It sharpens your perception, strengthens your posture, refines your energy. The less you speak, the more you notice. The less you react, the more influence you gain. Distance becomes your shield, and composure your weapon. The world mistakes your quiet for submission, not realizing that in the economy of power, attention is currency, and you've stopped spending yours cheaply. Hidden aggression doesn't always register as anger. It registers as pressure. You can feel it in the air before you can name it. It's the weight that enters a room before a dominant person speaks, the vibration that makes everyone subtly adjust their posture. It's not emotion, It's energy, an invisible field generated by intention, a tightened jaw, a prolonged stare, the faint smirk that lingers just long enough to unsettle. These are not gestures of feeling, but of charge. They transmit dominance like static electricity, unseen yet undeniably felt. Machiavelli would say that the one who controls this field doesn't need to assert power. They radiate it. Every human interaction is an exchange of frequencies. Some people leak energy, others absorb it, and a few know how to direct it. The aggressive body does not shout, it emanates. A leader who enters a meeting with quiet certainty changes the molecular atmosphere without lifting a finger. The nervous adjust unconsciously, their voices softening, their gestures shrinking. This is not hypnosis. It's energetic geometry. The confident body expands, the submissive contracts. Power is not a metaphor here, it's physics. The body is a transmitter, and intention is its current. Machiavelli understood this long before psychology found words for it. He observed that rulers who maintained composure in crisis bent the emotions of their court like metal. Those who panicked, even momentarily, lost the invisible contract that kept others orbiting them. The energy of aggression, when mastered, becomes command presence, the ability to occupy space so completely that others rearrange themselves around you. And once you sense this current, you start reading people not by their words, but by the tension they broadcast. Some carry storm clouds in their shoulders. Others emit the calm hum of latent authority. To control energy is to control perception. The Machiavellian doesn't fight chaos. He alters the frequency of the room until chaos dissolves. He wins without resistance because everyone else is already adjusting to his rhythm, unconsciously surrendering to the gravity of his silence. The transition from participant to observer marks the beginning of true power. Most people live inside the storm of their emotions, reacting to every gust of approval or threat. The strategist, however, stands at the edge of the storm and studies its rhythm. He knows that the first rule of control is distance, not physical distance, but psychological altitude. From that height he can see patterns invisible to those trapped in reaction. The observer doesn't seek victory in arguments or validation from applause. He seeks understanding, the architecture of human motive, and in that understanding lies quiet supremacy. Machiavelli would say that every reaction is a confession of weakness. To react is to admit that someone else has reached inside your mind and pressed a button that you didn't guard. The strategist never allows that. He measures before responding, waits before revealing, observes before moving. His calm is not apathy, it's calculation. Each silence is a probe, each pause a test. He understands that most people reveal themselves through impatience, through the inability to sit with tension. And so he uses stillness as a net. The more others speak, the more they betray. The more they rush, the more predictable they become. The strategist archetype is the evolution of the hermit, solitude turned into precision. He is not detached from the world, but sees it from behind the veil, operating through observation instead of participation. His gaze becomes an instrument sharper than any weapon. He studies tone, timing, energy, the subtle rhythm of dominance shifting between bodies. In the theater of power, he sits in the dark, unseen but directing every act. This is Machiavellian mastery, to influence without exposure, to anticipate without effort, to win without entering the field. The observer becomes untouchable because he no longer seeks to be understood. He seeks only to understand, and in that stillness, he becomes the axis around which others unconsciously turn. Over time, something subtle but irreversible begins to happen. The more you observe, the less you need to perform. You start withdrawing from the compulsion to prove anything. Not your goodness, not your intelligence, not your strength. You no longer feel the need to fill silence with explanations or gestures that seek validation. The body begins to simplify itself. Movements slow down. Breath deepens. Words are chosen like weapons, not to attack, but to maintain precision. What used to be impulsive now becomes intentional. The nervous system, once reactive, becomes disciplined. You move as if every action were a decision, not a reflex. The aggression within you doesn't vanish, it transforms. It becomes concentrated, like heat turned into light. The same energy that once erupted as defense now becomes awareness. You feel tension rise in your body, but instead of releasing it outward, you channel it inward, grounding it into posture, into stillness. People around you sense this. They can't explain it, but they feel it. Your presence becomes heavier, magnetic. You occupy space without expanding, influence without forcing. What was once chaos becomes gravity. Machiavelli would call this the birth of true command, when the external world bends subtly around the internal equilibrium of one who no longer reacts. Power ceases to be something you chase, it becomes something you emanate. The body itself becomes language, shoulders relaxed but unyielding, gaze calm but penetrating, tone measured but absolute. You've turned aggression into elegance, dominance into poise. This transformation is not about suppressing instinct, but refining it. You no longer fight to win, you remain to rule. The battlefield is no longer outside but within, a constant discipline of energy, emotion, and attention. You become the strategist embodied, still, grounded, untouchable. And in that stillness, a new kind of power arises, one that doesn't conquer by movement but by presence. When you return to the world, you no longer blend into it, you bend it. Your silence carries more authority than others' noise. People feel your presence before you speak, as if the air itself adjusts around you. You don't need to assert power. It's embedded in your stillness. Your gaze no longer seeks approval or challenge. It observes, measures, understands. You move with the calm precision of someone who knows that control is never external, only internal. This is the Machiavellian ideal, power without performance. You no longer depend on persuasion, manipulation, or recognition. The body has become the instrument of influence, restrained, centered, deliberate. Others interpret your composure as mystery, your quiet as superiority, your ease as strength, and they're not wrong. You've mastered the art of invisible dominance, the ability to shape a room without speaking, to command attention without asking for it. You've become what Machiavelli called the prince who rules by perception. The world reads your silence as certainty, your patience as confidence, your restraint as control. You've transcended the game not by leaving it, but by playing from a different dimension, one where power is no longer something to prove, but something to embody. Hidden aggression is not darkness to be feared. It is the raw pulse of life, the primal energy that fuels creation and destruction alike. What corrupts it is blindness. When ignored, it festers. When denied, it disguises itself as virtue. The tyrant represses his aggression until it leaks through cruelty and control. The master, however, studies it. He neither indulges nor denies, he refines. Awareness becomes his weapon, discipline his armor. By observing his inner fire, he learns to command it rather than be consumed by it. Machiavelli would say that power is never moral or immoral. It is simply directed energy. The question is whether it's guided by consciousness or compulsion. Those who repress aggression act from fear, while those who face it act from clarity. In that awareness, power ceases to be violence and becomes presence, silent, contained, unshakable. Everything begins in the body, the tension, the impulse, the will. Before thought, before speech, there is energy, waiting for direction. Mastery is not the absence of aggression, but its transformation into intention. To know your own force and keep it still, that is the highest form of power. Look around you. The signals are everywhere, in the way someone's voice softens when they lie, in the way another person's eyes flicker when they feel cornered. Watch the room long enough, and you'll see the entire hierarchy play out in posture and tone. But the question isn't to just who is playing the game, it's whether you are too. When you speak, do you lean forward or hold back? When you smile, is it warmth or armor? Every gesture reveals something you'd rather keep hidden. The body never lies. It only performs the truth you try to conceal. Machiavelli would remind you that awareness begins at home. Before you decode others, study yourself. Notice the subtle aggression behind your politeness, the quiet need for control, disguised as calm. Observe how your body shifts when you feel unseen or overpowered. These are not flaws, They are messages. Each movement is your psyche trying to speak. Learn its language, and you gain sovereignty over it. The next time you enter a room, don't rush to read others. Read the air around you. Read the silence within you. Because the one who understands their own posture can't be manipulated by anyone else. Machiavelli would say that true power doesn't announce itself. It simply notices. It observes the tremor in the room, the breath before a lie, the silence that betrays fear. It never chases attention, because attention is already drawn to it. So take this as your initiation, the first lesson in decoding the unspoken architecture of control. You've glimpsed how bodies communicate what words conceal, how posture can dominate without violence, how calmness can command an entire room. If you've begun to see it, you've already stepped outside the illusion. But awareness demands continuity. Each observation is a doorway into deeper perception, into the world beneath gestures, beneath tone, beneath the facade of civility. Machiavelli's wisdom was never about cruelty, it was about clarity. To see clearly is to stop being ruled by what you don't understand. Subscribe, not to a channel, but to a discipline, a practice of perception. Because the next lesson doesn't begin with words, it begins in silence, where the body speaks and the wise listen.